I was buttoning my coat when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. It was my accountant, not a call, a text. Gwendolyn never texted. In 6 years of working together, she had sent me exactly two text messages, one when she was stuck in traffic before our annual filing meeting, and one when her office flooded and she needed to reschedule. That was it. So when her name appeared on my screen at 10:37 on a Sunday morning, something in my chest went cold before I even read the words. Do not go to your brothers today. Call me right now. I mean it. I stood there with one arm in my coat sleeve and one arm out, just staring at the screen. My brother Callum had invited the whole family over for brunch. It was supposedly a casual thing. Mimosas, eggs Benny, the usual gathering we did a few times a year at his place in Oakville. He and his wife Renata had a beautiful house on the lake, the kind with a wraparound deck and a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. I had been looking forward to it actually. My mother was flying in from Halifax. I hadn't seen her since Easter. I called Gwendolyn. She picked up on the first ring. Don't go, she said, before I could even say hello. I'm sorry to do this to you on a Sunday, but you need to hear what I found before you walk into that house. I sat down on my front steps, still half in my coat. The November air in Hamilton was sharp and grey, the kind of cold that settles into your bones if you're not moving. I wasn't moving. Tell me, I said. She took a breath. I heard papers shuffling. I've been going through the estate documents since Friday. You know how your fathers will set up the family trust, the property in Muskoka, the investment accounts, the business assets from the shop. Yes. Callum is the co-trustee. You knew that. I knew that. What you didn't know, Gwendolyn said, and her voice dropped half a register, is that he's been filing paperwork for the past 8 months to have you removed as a beneficiary. Not just restructured, removed. And the brunch today, I think that's where he was planning to get you to sign something. He would have framed it as a formality, a tax optimization thing, something boring that you'd skim an initial without reading. I didn't say anything for a long time. The wind pushed a single brown leaf across my front walk. I watched it skid into the flower bed. Gwendolyn, I said finally, how did you find this? Your father's original solicitor reached out to me on Friday afternoon. He'd been copied on some of the filings and something felt wrong to him. He called me because he couldn't reach you. Apparently, Callum told him you had changed your contact information, which you obviously had not. There it was, right there. The detail had made my stomach drop straight through the floor. Callum had told my father's lawyer that I had changed my contact information. He had been intercepting things, or at minimum, misdirecting them. For how long? I didn't know yet. But the brunch, the casual family, come over for eggs Benny, Sunday brunch, was not a brunch at all. It was a closing. I need to back up a little, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Or maybe it did and I just refused to see it. My father passed away 14 months ago. Lung cancer, fast and brutal. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He was 68 years old and he had spent 40 of those years building a small chain of hardware stores across southern Ontario. The kind of independent places that somehow survived the big box era because my dad knew every contractor and renovation hobbyist in a 30-kilometer radius by their first name. He was meticulous about everything. His books were immaculate. His will was detailed. He had updated it 3 years before he died, when he got the first hint that his health was declining. He left the business assets in a family trust. The beneficiaries were myself, my brother Callum, and my mother. Callum and I were named co-trustees because we were both local. Callum in Oakville, me in Hamilton, and my mother had never wanted to be involved in the business side of things. She trusted us. She trusted Callum, specifically because he was the older one, the one who had worked at the stall during university, the one who had given my father a grandson. I had built my own career in commercial real estate, which meant I understood numbers and contracts reasonably well. But estate administration is its own world, and after my father died, I leaned heavily on Gwendolyn to walk me through the trust structure. Callum had offered to handle the day-to-day filing. I had said yes because I was grieving and he was my brother, and it didn't occur to me not to trust him. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the first one. In the months after my father's death, I noticed small things. Callum would mention meetings with the trust's financial advisor that I hadn't been included in. When I asked about them, he would say it was just routine, nothing to bother bringing me in for. Once, I received a document in the mail with a sticky note in Callum's handwriting that said, "Just a formality, already signed my section, need your initials on page 4. I read it more carefully than he probably expected me to, and it turned out to be a restructuring document that shifted more administrative authority to him. I didn't sign it. I told him I wanted to review it with Gwendolyn first. He was annoyed. He said I was making things complicated. He said I had always been like this distrustful, difficult, the one who had to overthink everything while the rest of the family just got things done. I remember standing in his kitchen after that conversation, while Renata made tea and acted like nothing had happened, and thinking, am I overreacting? That feeling, that specific gaslit uncertainty about your own reasonable instincts, is something I have since talked about with my therapist at length. At the time, I just put the unsigned document in a folder and let it sit. But I also called Gwendolyn the next morning, just to have her take a look. And Gwendolyn, being Gwendolyn, had been quietly watching the trust filings ever since. So when she called me that Sunday morning, she wasn't calling about something she had just discovered. She was calling about something that had been building for 8 months and had just reached a point where she couldn't let me walk into that house without knowing. I went back inside. I took my coat off. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and asked Gwendolyn to walk me through everything she knew. The picture she painted was meticulous and devastating. Callum had retained a separate estate lawyer, not the family solicitor, someone new, someone none of us knew, and had been using that lawyer to draft amendments to the trust. The amendments were framed as administrative updates, efficiency measures, a streamlining of the beneficiary structure to reduce tax exposure. In isolation, each one looked almost reasonable. Together, they added up to something that would have, over the course of another year or two of quiet filings, left me with no meaningful claim on the trust assets. The Muskoka property alone was worth close to $2 million. The investment accounts had grown considerably since my father had set them up. The business assets, even in a sale, would have cleared 7 figures. Callum stood to gain everything I would have lost. There was more. Gwendolyn had found a discrepancy in the trust's communication records. Correspondence that was supposed to go to both trustees, me and Callum, had been redirected. Not all of it. Just the pieces that mattered. The filings. The amendment notices. The scheduling of reviews with the financial advisor. My name was still on the account, but the email address associated with my profile had been changed. Not to a fake address, to an address that looked almost exactly like mine. One transposed letter, the kind of thing you'd miss at a glance. Someone had logged into the trust administration portal and changed my contact details. I asked Gwendolyn if she knew when it happened. She said the system log showed a login from 9 months ago. She said the IP address was registered to a property in Oakville. I put my pen down on the notepad. 9 months ago, Callum had invited me to his house for Thanksgiving. He had asked to use my laptop to look something up because his phone was dead. I had said yes without thinking. He had been on it for maybe 4 minutes while I had Renata set the table. 4 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table in Hamilton, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor of reality shifting under me. Not panic, exactly. Something colder. The slow, nauseating recognition that someone you love, someone you grew up with, someone who taught you how to ride a bike in a Canadian Tire parking lot, someone who cried at your father's grave, had been quietly, methodically dismantling your future for nearly a year. I called my mother. She was already on her way to Callum's from the airport. She answered in the car, cheerful, saying she was almost in Oakville and asking if I was close behind. Don't go in yet, I said. Just wait in the parking lot at the Tim Hortons on Lake Shore. I need 30 minutes. Her voice shifted. What's wrong? I'll explain everything. Just wait for me. Don't call him. She didn't ask again. She just said, okay. My mother has always been like that. She reads the room without needing a diagram. It's something I've loved about her my whole life, and something Callum had apparently been counting on her not to do in his direction. In those 30 minutes, I called the family's original solicitor, a man named Mr. Tran, who had handled my father's estate from the beginning. He had already spoken with Gwendolyn, and he was, as he put it, deeply concerned about the integrity of the trust administration. He was not a dramatic man. Deeply concerned, coming from him, was the equivalent of anyone else saying this is a complete disaster. He walked me through my options quickly and clearly. The unauthorized access to the trust portal was a serious problem, potentially criminal. The contact detail changes and the misdirected correspondence could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. The amendment filings, once examined in sequence, painted a clear pattern of intent. None of this was accidental or administrative. He said he had already contacted a colleague who specialized in estate litigation and that she was available to meet with me as early as Tuesday. I asked him about the brunch. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Based on what Gwendolyn described, I believe the document Callum intended you to sign today would have been a consent form waiving your right to contest the trust amendments. He would have presented it as routine, a co-trustee signature requirement. And if I had signed it, you would have had a very limited basis for challenging anything that followed." I drove to Oakville, not to Callum's house, to the Tim Hortons on Lake Shore, where my mother was sitting at a window table with a medium coffee and her hands folded on the table, watching for my car. I parked and went inside and sat across from her and told her everything. I watched her face as I talked. My mother is not a person who cries easily. She raised 2 kids mostly alone while my father ran the stores. She nursed him through 6 weeks of dying without falling apart in front of either of us. She is made of something steady and quiet that I have always aspired to and only partially inherited. She listened to me without interrupting. When I finished, she put both hands flat on the table. "Show me the documents," she said. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Gwendolyn had sent, the amendment filings, the communication logs, the IP address notation. She looked at each one for a long time. Then she said, "I need you to understand something. I signed something 3 months ago that Callum sent me. He said it was a tax form, a federal filing for the trust." The coffee in my stomach turned to ice. "Do you have a copy?" He said I didn't need one. We sat there for a moment in the Tim Hortons on Lake Shore with the Sunday morning coffee crowd moving around us, and I reached across the table and held my mother's hands and told her it was going to be okay. I didn't know yet if that was true, but I believed it enough to say it. The next 3 weeks were not easy. The estate litigation lawyer, a woman I call sharp and relentless, because those are the 2 words I think of when I picture her, reviewed everything and confirmed what Mr. Tran had suspected. The document my mother had signed was not a federal tax form. It was a trustee consent document that Callum had prepared through his separate lawyer, worded in a way that was technically legal but deliberately obscured. Getting it set aside would require demonstrating that she had signed under false pretenses, which was very doable given that she had been explicitly told it was something else. Callum's amendment filings were put under formal review: the unauthorized access to the trust portal, the changed contact details, the redirected correspondence was reported to the Ontario Provincial Police. An investigator was assigned. Hinata, it emerged, had not known everything, or so she later claimed. But the timeline of certain filings matched dates when she and Callum had made specific financial decisions together: a renovation on the Oakville house, a deposit on a cottage in Prince Edward County, in ways that suggested they were spending against anticipated assets that were not yet and would never legitimately be theirs. Callum called me 3 weeks into the process after he had been formally notified of the trust review. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen. His voice was the voice I had grown up with. He called me by the nickname only family used. He said he could explain everything. He said I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding. He said our mother was devastated. He said our father would not have wanted this. I saved the voicemail. My lawyer said to save everything. He called 2 more times that week. I did not pick up. The hardest part, the part I wasn't prepared for, wasn't a legal process. It wasn't the financial complexity or the estate litigation or the meetings with lawyers and accountants and investigators. It was the specific grief of watching a story you thought you knew rewrite itself backwards. Every memory I had of Callum, I found myself re-examining. The Thanksgiving when he borrowed my laptop. The unsigned document with the sticky note. The brunch invitations that were never just brunches. The years of being told I was the difficult one, the one who overthought things, the one who made everything more complicated than it needed to be. He had been counting on that narrative. He had built it, carefully over years. The story of me as the suspicious, prickly, overly cautious sister, so that when the moment came, no one would question why I had been edged out. They would just nod and say, well, she was always difficult to work with. What he miscalculated was Gwendolyn. He had never paid much attention to her. She was just my accountant, a quiet woman who sent spreadsheets and filing reminders. He had not anticipated that a quiet woman who sends spreadsheets might also be the kind of person who keeps meticulous records and notices when a client's contact details change on an external portal without the client's knowledge. He had also miscalculated my mother. The document she had signed was set aside. Her formal statement to the investigator was precise, detailed, and damning. She described exactly what Callum had told her. The document was, and exactly what it turned out to be. She did not hedge. She did not qualify. She told the truth in the specific, unflinching way that my mother has always told the truth, and I think that more than anything else was what undid Callum's confidence that this could be quietly walked back. 6 months after that Sunday morning text from Gwendolyn, the trust was formally restored to its original structure. The unauthorized amendments were voided, the contact details were corrected, the financial advisor held a full review of all transactions during the affected period, and 2 transfers that should not have occurred were reversed. The OPP investigation resulted in charges, fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. I'm not going to detail the outcome of that process here. Some of it is still moving through the system. But I will say that Callum and Renata did not have a quiet autumn in their lakeside house in Oakville. The Muskoka property is still in the trust. I was up there with my mother in September. We took the canoe out early one morning when the lake was still and the maples were just starting to turn. That particular October red that exists basically nowhere on earth the way it exists in the Canadian Shield. My mother made tea on the old camp stove my father had bought in 1987 and never once considered replacing. We didn't talk about Callum much. There wasn't much left to say. What I keep thinking about still is the morning I was buttoning my coat. How close it was. How ordinary the moment felt. A Sunday. A family brunch. A coat on a hook by the door. How certain I was, for the 3 seconds before Gwendolyn's text arrived, that the day was going to be exactly what it appeared to be. I think about the version of me that doesn't have Gwendolyn. That walks into that house, that smiles at my mother over eggs and mimosas, that reaches the end of the meal when Callum slides a document across the table and says, just a formality, already signed my section, need your initials on page 4. I think about how easily I would have signed. That's the part that stays with me, not the betrayal. I've had time with that now, and grief does what it does. It's the proximity. The fact that it almost worked. My father built something over 40 years that he wanted to leave for the people he loved. He was meticulous about it. He updated his will. He chose his trustees carefully. He thought he had accounted for everything. He couldn't have accounted for the son who smiled at his grave and then went home and started filing paperwork. But he raised a daughter who hired a meticulous accountant and trusted her gut when something felt wrong and didn't sign things she hadn't read. And maybe in the end, that's what he was really leaving me. I keep coming back to the quote. The way I had one arm in and one arm out when the text came through. How close I was to finishing that button, walking out the door and sitting down at Callum's table without the first idea of what was waiting for me there. A document. A pen. A brother I had known my entire life, watching me initial away my own future. What stopped it wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that because it would be easier to say I was lucky and move on. But luck didn't build 6 years of quiet, meticulous record keeping. Luck didn't notice a transposed letter in an email address. Luck didn't make Gwendolyn pick up the phone on a Sunday morning and say, before I could even speak, don't go. What she had was something I think we undervalue, the simple integrity of doing your job the way it's meant to be done. Even when no one is watching, even when it's inconvenient, even on a weekend when the person you're calling probably just wants to have brunch and not think about estate filings. That kind of honesty, the unglamorous, show up anyway kind, is what actually changes outcomes. Callum counted on the people around me not paying close attention. He built his whole plan around that assumption. He was wrong about one person, and that was enough. What he had on his side was something that looked like intelligence but wasn't. He was clever. There's a difference. Clever plans for the short term, clever accounts for what people are likely to notice, not what a careful person will eventually find. Genuine intelligence asks, What happens if I'm wrong about what goes undetected? He never asked that. He changed an email address by one letter and thought it was invisible. He sent my mother a document she couldn't understand and assumed she'd never tell anyone. He borrowed my laptop for 4 minutes and thought I'd never connect it to anything. Each individual move had a kind of tactical smartness to it. Together, they added up to a plan that depended entirely on everyone else being less attentive than they were. That's not intelligence. That's arrogance wearing intelligence's coat. And then there's what it took on my end, and my mother's, to see this through once we knew. Because knowing isn't the same as acting. Sitting across from my mother at that Tim Hortons, telling her that her son had used her signature against her. Watching her put her hands flat on the table and say, "Show me the documents." That took something. Choosing to go forward with the formal review, the investigators, the estate litigation, all of it, knowing it would cost relationships and months of my life and a kind of grief you don't fully anticipate. That took something too. Not toughness in the aggressive sense, more like the stubborn refusal to let someone else's betrayal become your permanent loss. The willingness to stay in something hard because walking away would mean letting a lie stand as the truth. My father kept meticulous books for 40 years. He updated his will. He built something careful and lasting and handed it to people he loved. He built a daughter who reads what she signs, who hires people she trusts, who, when the floor shifts under her, doesn't move until she understands why. I think, in the end, that was always part of what he was leaving me.